Hello everyone, my name is Parsa,
And my name is Parthay.
and this is our TOKI presentation. Today we're going to be looking at the analysis of executive power and the ambiguities of our laws. We'll be looking and exploring the relations between Iran and the US in early 2020 in relation to other global events as well. For the background of our RLS, we'll first look at when Trump took office. There became rising tensions between the US and Iran. Trump began the practice of maximum pressure, and therefore he pulled out of the sanctioned relief deal in order to delay Iran's nuclear war program. Since on December 27th, he actually targeted many of the Iranian sites in Iran, and on January 3rd, 2020, he ordered a drone strike on Iran and killed the right-hand man of the supreme leader of Iran, named Soleimani.
The area of knowledge that applies to this is history, which is the study of past events. This area of knowledge applies because the study of Soleimani's attack by the United States is a study of past events that happened on January 3rd, 2020.
And when looking at this, many questions rise up as well. And for this, we have to look at what are the limitations of the interpretation of our laws and how the countries use these laws in order to justify their actions not only in a global scale but also within their diplomacy as well.
What is the specific knowledge question?
The specific knowledge question is what are the limitations of their interpretation of our laws?
When we're extracting the knowledge question, we see this from the claims. The claims of the RLS are created by Mohammad Javad Zarif and Mike Pompeo. Zarif exclaims that this was a war crime, and Mike Pompeo, however, said it was justified. The questions raised by the RLS are about the legality of the action. Was Trump's decision justified? Should this be allowed? What laws support which side? Who dictates the validity of the claims? How can laws be interpreted in multiple ways? And how can both be right, and can both be right? When we're connecting this, we can see that Zarif is basically saying that it's a violation of Article 51 of self-defense, and Mike Pompeo is saying that it was self-defense because the threat was imminent. The interpretation of these laws is very important, and it is a limitation because it comes down to the definition of two words, self-defense and imminency.
So for our first perspective, we'll be looking at Zarif and how Iran's perspective on this situation. But before we can see that, we got to look at how and why he is important in this matter. Well, we know that he's a practitioner because he has a degree in not only political science, but also he has a degree in history, as well as he's the lawyer. And also he's the prime minister of Iran and also the foreign minister of Iran. And therefore we know that he's credible and is also involved with many of the global issues between not only Iran, but also on a global scale. And his specific claim was that in an exercise to our self-defense, we are bound by international law, unlike the United States, which is not bound by international law. And to really analyze what this means, he's saying that unlike the US, Iran and many other nations that are part of also the United Nations that he's stating by international law are bound by these laws and they follow these laws strictly. However, he's saying that the US does not, and they manipulate these laws in order to justify their action. And justifying how our quote is credible and how our sources are credible, we know that our source is credible because it's a direct interview with CNN on January 7th, where Zarif had an interview with one of the reporters of CNN. This source is reliable as it's a direct conversation between the practitioner and someone else, and therefore there are no reasons for wrongful interpretation as the viewer can hear and see Zarif personally. And when looking at the ways of knowing that are used in his conversation and also his reasoning, we can see that he used the ways of knowing and reasoning and emotion. The reason why he's reasoning is because he makes the point of Article 51 of the UN article. In this article, the Article 51 of the UN article essentially gives detail about self-defense. And the Iran official says that the US does not have the ability to attack in this way, but Iran does not know that the US has acted in this manner. He makes the point that the US did not have adhered to these laws, and therefore he justifies that her actions was not legally allowed as they wrongfully interpreted these laws in order to justify their action. And another ways of knowing that he used was emotion. He also represented the thoughts of the people living in Iran, as many of the people in Iran are rioting and angry, and therefore this influences the decision because of his emotion towards his people, and also because he's representing his people. And following the death of Soleimani, as can be seen on TV and news outlets, you can see there was many riots within Iran, and many people took to the streets to express their opinions about this matter, and many were angry about this. And when looking at his perspective, it's also important to look at the connections to other perspectives from shared and to personal knowledge groups. And this can be seen as negatively because he's definitely biased towards Iran because of his position as a foreign affairs minister of Iran. And therefore, we can justify that he also comes with a shared knowledge group as he's working with other people to form one knowledge statement. And when also looking at his claim, it's also important to see if it adheres with the truth test. And for this, we use the truth test of coherence and correspondence. And for his coherence, we use his people, and for correspondence, we use UN law. And when looking at these, we can just say that yes, it is justified as it does not abound to certain biased beliefs, and its claim is based on textual and real-world evidence. And for the truth test, its correspondence, he uses empirical evidence to make the claim. However, bias still influences both practitioners. He also uses coherence because reflecting ideas of his people. And then we're looking at the conclusions from the truth test and claim. In summary, we can tell that the perspective one concludes that the U.S. decision was not justified as it wrongfully interpreted the international war laws in order to carry out its executive actions.
The second perspective is made by Mike Pompeo. Mike Pompeo matters in the specific real-life situation because he was directly involved in the orchestration of the killing of Soleimani. He is the Secretary of State of the United States and worked as a former U.S. Army officer and was the director of the CIA. The claim created by Mike Pompeo, there are two specific claims. One is, it was a right decision. We got it right. The Department of Defense did excellent work. And the president had an entirely legal, appropriate, and a basis as well as the decision that fit within our strategy to counteract the threat of malignant activity from Iran more broadly. And he also said, if you're looking for eminence, you need to look no further than the days that led up to the strike that was taken against Soleimani. Mike Pompeo is saying in this quote that killing Soleimani was a lawful and legal decision created by Trump, the Department of Defense, and the Department of State. He also said that the threat is an imminent threat, making it self-defense. The source material this comes from is an interview with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo by reporters explained on CNBC. Therefore, it is credible. The ways of knowing he used was reason, intuition, and emotion. Firstly, he used reason when he was making his judgment. A national security source picked up on cell phone activity that said that they were going to actively plan for an attack. This basically showed imminence, which is referring to the UN law about self-defense, because they were actively planning for this attack. Mike Pompeo also already had intelligence on General Soleimani and wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible, as he had already identified their group as a terrorist group after working in the CIA as the CIA's director. Mike Pompeo is also familiar with the Article 2 of the Constitution, which allows the Trump to act within the clause of Commander-in-Chief. This allows Trump to act under domestic laws to an extent rather than international law. Mike Pompeo used inductive reasoning because he had specific information which allowed him to reason and generalize that Soleimani was a threat during that time. Mike Pompeo also used intuition. Intuition is the ability to understand something immediately without the need for constant reasoning. Mike Pompeo also used intuition because he has the credentials to be able to make this type of decision. He can have a gut feeling about this. He realized this guy was a threat and decided that it was a good idea to eliminate him. He is credible to be able to do this because he was the director of the CIA and graduated first in his class at West Point. He was also a U.S. Army soldier, as I said before. He has dealt with criminals before and has the ability to figure out whether this was a threat or not with quick and fast evidence. Mike Pompeo also used emotion, matter of fact, because of his status in the system. Mike Pompeo is the Secretary of State for Trump, which means he's basically his right-hand man. Because of this, it is basically that his bias is inherent towards his job. There has been many instances also that Mike Pompeo has avoided topics about Trump's misconduct and refuses to answer those with defensive remarks, such as, you've gotten your facts wrong. Sounds like you're working at least in part for the Democratic National Committee. These statements like this shows that he is very partial towards Trump and will jump to support Trump's decision. A counterclaim for this is his emotion can cause his claim to be invalid. This is a common knowledge This is because it's common knowledge that Mike Pompeo will support Trump politically. Due to this, we should rule out his perspective. However, in a rebuttal, we can see that his emotion should not take away from the fact that he has good reason and intuition. Due to this, we cannot entirely rule out his perspective. Connections to other perspectives. Mike Pompeo's claims extended to the shared knowledge of the entire State Department. The State Department claims that through their intelligence, General Soleimani was developing plans to attack American diplomats through many different examples. The State Department released a statement about it. And all of these things is an example of how Mike Pompeo got his information from the State Department, a shared knowledge complex group which made this decision. The truth test used to do this is the correspondence. This claim corresponds with the real world because Mike Pompeo uses empirical evidence in determining his claim from reason and intuition. Mike Pompeo has gotten intelligence from the CIA in the past where he heard radio chatter about this imminent threat. This basically allows him to pass the truth test. Conclusions from the truth test and the claim shows that Pompeo has a mostly valid claim, and his story does have some few holes because of his emotion and his partiality to Trump, but we cannot rule out his perspective because he has empirical evidence and a very good intuition, which allows him to be valid in this situation.
And when we do this, now it's important to look at and analyze the validity of both claims and their conclusion. After the explanation of the truth test in both perspectives, we can conclude that both points are valid because they are structured behind different law interpretations and claims. This makes it very difficult to distinguish the legality with certainty because it will lead up to the UN to decide based on available source material. And that just basically means that because of how each nation has interpreted these laws that are set up by the United Nations, it's very hard to distinguish which side is more credible than the other.
This also applies to the world and the future because the ambiguity of international laws may lead to changes in defining these laws and the specific key words associated with it. In this case, eminency and self-defense. The UN must determine who is right about the situation, and that will dictate future codes and future norms in the future, which will definitely change how international relationships are acted upon or how they work. These basically shows that there's many loopholes and ambiguities in many law interpretations. Key words can be interpreted in many different ways, making the legality of decisions to be especially difficult to determine at times. The KQ, the knowledge question, also applies to other areas of knowledge, primarily in history and ethics with our original RLS. Our first RLS connection is with the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment was ratified in December 1791, which was a law that says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the rights of a people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. There are many possible interpretations and ambiguities with this law. The Second Amendment was initially meant for militias, as it says, necessary for the security of state for a well-regulated militia. But now people are making the case that it applies to everyone, as it says, the rights of the people should keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, meaning that everyone should be able to have arms. So basically, it is saying that, but now make the case that it applies to everyone. So in this case, what is the right interpretation? It's very difficult to see that because the law shows two different interpretations, and people can interpret it in different ways to see how whatever they want to see. So this is important because this RLS relates to the primary RLS because this RLS also raises questions about loopholes and ambiguities in our laws, because it's very hard to interpret certain words and keywords because of how the law is structured. So this is considered another limitation of a law.
Another RLS that we can look at is actually the travel ban that happened. And when looking at this, we can see that the travel ban that happened a couple years ago, primarily between the years of 2015 and even until now, we can see that there were 7 countries within the Middle East that were banned from entering the U.S., even with a visa or any sort of legal documents. And this was Trump's executive order in order to keep out of what he said was terrorists from Middle East. And this is because the laws that the international laws gave him power to attack in self-defense any nation that was anywhere related to or involved within the 9/11 attacks. And therefore, he interpreted these laws from 2001 in order to justify any action or executive action within the Middle East following the events of 9/11. And this just really shows the ambiguities in the interpretations of laws by nations in order to justify their action, because when later studies have shown that the seven countries that were banned by Trump in his executive order were actually not affiliated with the 9/11 attacks whatsoever, but the only reason that Trump did this was in order to benefit the country's economic and political stability in order to keep out any Muslims from entering the nation as well. And we can also see that one of the nations that wasn't part of the ban was Saudi Arabia, and the reason behind why they weren't banned was because they had a direct trading with the U.S. and because their country benefited the U.S. economy as well. And it just really relates back to our RLS because it raises the same types of knowledge question where how do nations and political parties use international laws that are supposed to keep order and balance within the many nations and also within the globe, and use these to justify their actions.
Basically, and he's saying that there's loopholes in this law, as a ban on Muslims would be illegal. However, a ban on certain countries is not illegal. This is a loophole in trying to not allow immigration into those countries. Conclusions. In conclusion, this RLS is essentially telling us about the limitations of laws. There are definitely some limitations of laws and loopholes, and these things are important to observe because they will shape our decisions in the future for the UN, for the United States, and the whole world. Thank you.
This concludes our TK presentation. Have a good day.